Morning, Tom. Tom's got to connect to
He's
the,
working on it.
working on it. I'll give him a couple of minutes to see if Herb shows up.
I know he was planning on it.
Yeah.
You know, I put together an update, so. All right, am I in here?
You just
You
joined.
are.
Tom Slack, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Tom.
Weird stuff going on. Let me get my notes here.
Okay. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Laura, could you send Herb an email or something and tell him we're started? But we're going to start talking about the harbor plan first, so he will not have missed anything. I would like to introduce to everybody Jake Puffer, who has been approved as a member of this committee as an alternate, but I consider that just a little technical detail. He's fully qualified and invited to participate. Jake is a shell fisherman, the grant off of Mayo Beach. Now, Jake, was your father once on NRAB?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I think he served for 10 or 15 years or so, but yeah, he was on it for a while.
Okay. And Jake has also been chair of the Shellfish Advisory Board. So Jake's got a long history in shell fishing that will help us. First thing I'd like to talk about is the Harbor Marine Resources Survey, which we are tentatively on the warrant for the September 10th town meeting. After a number of discussions, John Dwayne and just see, I'm Herb, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I just heard you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm late. My
No, that's okay.
My iPad failed me and I'm
All right.
on with my wife's iPad.
I was just saying that we're going to talk about the harbor plan first, because Jake Puffer, who is a new member of our committee, has to
Jake.
leave it in 45 minutes. So this is basically the same plan we have talked about after a number of discussions between John and myself and Rebecca Ruffley, who's the town purchasing manager. We decided that instead of asking for 60,000, we'd ask for 75,000. And I think there are two reasons for that. One is that, as John pointed out, there's going to be an increase in motoring costs because fuel prices are up. And we wanted to be sure that we were not pressing people on that. The other thing which has occurred to me is that we placed a big importance in phytoplankton sampling and testing. Phytoplankton are what the shellfish eat. And I just noticed there are two issues which are showing up in the literature which are a concern. One is that there could be variants of the phytoplankton, different species, which may not be as beneficial as the one we're used to. And the other is that if you have enough nitrogen in the harbor, you can get phytoplankton blooms, which are very similar to the sort of blooms that you can get in ponds. So there's some good reason to do a significant amount of phytoplankton sampling in order to see, in a sense, to reassure ourselves. So Jake, let me put you on the spot. I gave you a copy of the technical part of our proposal. Do you have any comments or suggestions for us?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I guess at first I have a question. So do they just, when they study it, so they're looking at shellfish, do they look at it just at one point in the season? Because I think you and I discussed this a little bit of timing, because over the course of the season, the harbor will change. And I think, that might be just as important as the samplings themselves. Because if you look at, harbor vegetation in the spring, it's going to be very different than harbor vegetation in the fall. Like we get this, I forget the technical names of everything, but we get this like green grass in the middle of the summer. So if you were just looking at harbor vegetation in the fall, I think it would be important to know exactly when you're looking at it. And also with the climate changing and the water warming, things are becoming earlier. So it might be important to know, or maybe look at different sites for multiple points throughout the season.
So not just once on the shellfish, more the shellfish vegetation issue than the shellfish themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So that's one thing. And then the other thing that wasn't included is I don't know, the predators to shellfish, and different crabs. We're seeing more blue crabs and green crabs now. So that might be important to know. Conch, the spider crabs, sometimes they come in droves, and then other times not as much. So just the crabs, conch population. And those were the two key things I was thinking about. And I don't know, like once this gets approved, if timing, maybe we want to have a longer conversation of when, when the spat shows up versus like, because that's going to totally shift the populations of oysters as opposed in the fall versus like, obviously when, there's little sea that just develops. So
The way this works, Jake, is that, as I say, John and I have been working with a woman in town hall, Rebecca Ruffley. She's the assistant town manager, but she's also the purchasing agent. And we're going to put out what's called a request for proposals, which RFP. And we will then look at those proposals, both from the point of view of their cost, but from the point of view of likelihood of success. And I'd like you to be involved in that review.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And then we would select someone, and then I would see that we would have some future conversations with them to make sure that the person doing the work and we were in agreement on exactly what was going to be done and what schedule.
Yeah.
So those are a couple of good points. Would you send me an email about the shellfish predators? The
Sure,
ones you're
yeah.
concerned about, the time of year when you think that they might appear. So
Yeah,
so we make an accurate reference to that in the
Yeah, they definitely
RFP.
show up at different times a year. And yeah, like I said, they've been changing
Yeah.
from
So
a
things
lot
that,
of spider crabs to more of a mix of green crabs,
Yeah.
blue crabs, spider crabs. We used to have a lot of, we call them calico. They're like
right.
the little orange crabs, and they kind of went away, but now they seem to be making a comeback. So things definitely change from season to season, but I'll send you an email with that.
Okay, thanks. Does anyone else want to make a comment about the RFP? We're taking into account what Jake has said and try to put something together in a final form that we can send out.
John, do we know if by September, the town will have resolved the financial issues so that free cash is available, or?
I am told that it is. And I'm even been told that the 75K is, but we have had our hopes up before.
Yeah,
I guess I'd like to just say regarding Jake's comments and everything, I mean, that this is sort of fluid. We're sending out, the timing is the one thing that we get to resolve, John, if I'm correct here. We need to figure out if we have a town meeting on the 10th of September, is that what I just heard? We need to get these RFPs out. But I was hoping to button that up this week so that we could send them out. And we need to figure out how long we're going to give candidates to respond. Technically, it could be right up until like the day before town meeting, so we would have a sense. But certainly the week before town meeting. So that's the first week in September. And I don't know that 5 weeks is enough time at this point to allow firms to come up with bids. And I don't even actually know if it's that critical. I'd certainly love to have some prices so that we could be educated when we went to in front of the voters to say, this is what it's going to be. Here's what the cost is estimated to be. Anyways, that's my one comment, is that I think we should button up this RFP this week so that we can send it out. And when it comes to the technical details about what we're looking to get exactly out of the harbor survey, I think that's going to be, I would hope that would be a little bit fluid when it comes to the candidates that we're interviewing for the position of doing the harbor survey, that they should have some input into it as well in what's important and how we could do things. So that's kind of my comments about it. And so I would assume that we're going to have this request for proposals put together by the end of the week and have it sent out to some candidates.
The one thing that I think that's the right strategy. The one thing that concerns me is we're talking about August. And two things happen in August. One is people go on vacation, and two, there's a lot of field work that's scheduled in August because you generally have good weather, and it's probably the warmest time of the season. And to Jake's point of view, that might make it an interesting time. So I think we may have to ask people to have a reply by Labor Day, but we may have to say we have to leave the door open for an extension if, for the reasons I said or other reasons, that there's going to be a delay.
Yeah, we'll just need to figure out a way to word it. So that would be part of the RFP, is saying that here's the deadline. If there's a deadline in there where the stuff's due. So I don't know if you can be, I don't know if we can be flexible on that, or if it's something that if you set a deadline that this is when it needs to be submitted by.
Well, deadlines can be extended.
Right, so some simple language like deadline can be extended by agreement or something like that to that effect. Again, in conversation with Rebecca, and I don't know where we're at with speaking with Rebecca about that particular issue.
Well, I hope to get something on her desk by Monday, so I'll take Jake's comments and this question of timing and then send everything off to her. As far as I know, and this goes to the point that Tom raised, as far as I know, this article is going on to the town warrant. Though the select board have not yet voted on it, and they may raise some objection to the 75 rather than 60. The FinCom has not yet voted on it. I was scheduled to meet with them at the end of May, and then we got the rug pulled out of us because the town had no money. Town now does have some money. I think we probably ought to meet with the Shellfish Advisory Board again. Particularly given some of the points that Jake mentioned. But basically, I think we're going to go ahead with 75. We're going to go ahead with the basic write-up that John and I have done with some of the corrections that Jake made. And I would like to put to this committee a vote that we proceed to ask the town to put this on the warrant for September the 10th. So I need a motion to that effect.
I move that we do what you said.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? 1, 2, 3,
Yes.
4, 5. Thank you. I like Laura's language. I'll have to try that on Linda sometime. I don't know if it'll work. That's great. Herb, Laura, now want to talk about the ponds issue. Jake, for a little background, we had split this committee's work into three branches, if you like. We have the harbor and shellfishing, which we just talked about. We have ponds, and Herb Gestalter and Laura Hewitt are the two people in the committee who are focused on that. They both live on the ponds, on Gull Pond and Long Pond. And Tom Slack, because he's a member also of the Open Space Committee, is involved in the inland, town properties inland, not on a pond or near a pond, not on the harbor. So Herb and Laura are the ponds people, and they've been working on this for about the past year. Let's see where we are.
Laura, you want to start this?
Sure. Well, thank you, John. We have been working on this for a number of months. We've made some progress in that we've continued to gather information to set the foundation for a plan. To date, we've met with the Conscom, Board of Health from Wellfleet, Lauren McKean from the park, Stephen Smith, who's the plant ecologist from the park, Sophia Fox, also with the park, Suzanne Thomas, who is with Community Services and oversees the beaches and ponds.
She's the beach administrator.
Beach administrator, thank you. APCC, Joanne Muramato has been very helpful. And we've also attended a combined APCC and Cape Cod Commission meeting that was on pond health, and they're starting a lot of pond work. So timely group and efforts for what we're trying to do. I would say that in general, when you get into the weeds, there are a number of different philosophies on what's the primal cause of all this. And I think what Herb and I have come down to is all of it matters. And that our goal, which is to do no harm and do whatever we can to minimize the impact of the human footprint in terms of the deterioration of the ponds and the surrounding areas, that taking the view of anything we can do to help that is worth pursuing. All of the parties.
You said all matters or everything matters. Could you be a little more specific about what's in
I'm
all
headed
and
there.
everything?
Yep, I'm headed there.
Okay.
So, right. So some of the parties, for example, felt like septics are the #1 cause. Other felt like septics aren't the major culprit, that it's nutrients coming from different sources, or but what we came down to is all of the contributing factors are things that we should be looking at and figuring out ways to mitigate them. So that's what I meant by that comment. The good news is everyone was super enthusiastic that we are trying to update the pond management plan. They all are in agreement that trying to develop some objective criteria that we can use as a baseline and then test periodically to see how water quality is changing makes a lot of sense. We've gotten a fair amount of agreement on the criteria that we're looking to use. Another area of consensus is that climate change is going to play a huge role, obviously, one of the main reasons we're doing this, and that the large reduction in acidity after the Clean Air Act was passed has had large impact in terms of the ponds have become more alkaline than acidic. And that's far more hospitable, particularly with increasing temperatures for plant growth. So there's just a lot more growth in the ponds, a lot more particles. So for those of us who were around when it was the pre-70s and the early 70s and remember crystal clear water, that was thanks to all the acid in the water as it virtually sterilized the ponds. Another area that all parties agreed on is that nitrogen and phosphates are key stimulants. No question on that one. And so our takeaways are, as I said earlier, that all of these factors together are what we need to be figuring out in terms of how we treat it rolling forward. Let's see, some specifics. Some of the.
Laura, if I can just jump in for a minute.
Sure,
We
go ahead.
started off naively thinking that our goal should be to improve the ponds and or keep them in their current state. And it was pointed out to us that none of us will have sufficient control of all the variables to make a statement that we will keep the ponds in their current state. That eutrophication is a natural process, and that our goal has got to be to do nothing to accelerate the natural eutrophication. We're looking at a 10-year period. And the other that Laura mentioned about being an objectively based pond is, I guess several of you know, I've been involved in running Gulf Pond Area Conservation Association for more than 20 years. And I look back in that, and our great failure in that was not having objective criteria to discuss the pond's condition. So it was always a debate among people of, are the ponds deteriorating or are they not deteriorating? then what does that mean? So we are going to establish or propose to establish in this plan probably 10 criteria that will be tested for each pond at least once a year, so that the town of Wellfleet will finally have an accurate view of the condition of the ponds.
And some of those criteria are the ones that we've talked about in meetings before in terms of phosphates, pH, nitrogen, water and air temperature, dissolved oxygen, clarity, cyanobacteria, and coliform bacteria. That's the gist of the main list. And Herb's been working with APCC this summer as well as last summer in doing the cyanobacteria testing. So we feel like we've got a pretty good view of how things work. In our discussion with Lauren McKean from the park, she offered to explore potential joint testing with the park, and whatever this turns into from a group standpoint of the management plan, whether it's the town or privately organized or a combination of all of the above. Let's see, some of,
Just make a suggestion. I'm
sure,
as an ex-chemist intrigued by this effect of the change of pH, which says we made the air cleaner, so the pH went up and more basic, less acidic, and that created a problem. If I think there are some ponds for which data go way back, and it would be very interesting to look at that, 50 years ago data, the earliest you can get, probably right after World War II, and see if it was possible to have at that time clear water with a more basic pH. Because if that turned out to be the case, then that really reinforces the idea that what you go after is the septic groundwater and contribution to the pond. That reinforces the idea that if you solve that, you're going to, even though the pH is going up, you're all right. But if you need low pH too, also, I doubt there's going to be much support for dropping acids into the pond.
agreed,
By me, so.
agreed.
We could, I think the earliest data I've seen is
It's important to see what
1983.
whether you can find an appropriate balance between those two factors.
John, I think the earliest data I've seen over the years, I think is the early 80s. I mean, we can go back and look. And we can
Park might
there
have
only
something
be able,
earlier.
yeah, Sophia Fox would be the one who would know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So
the
we can
CPR
ask
would
her,
have data.
because they have been reviewing all the data for the past couple of years. That they spent the past 2 years reviewing all the data. So Sophia will be able to tell us the earliest data. But we should emphasize the people who brought up acidity to us have told us that this is in historic proportions of a reduction, out of normal chemical range, 300 times, something of that. As they've also emphasized that the temperature increase over the past several years is beyond
Right,
normal experience.
right.
I have a question.
Sure.
So yeah, this is really interesting. And yeah, it's great you're gonna test everything to get a baseline. So it seems like if part of the problem is people, I mean, there's not really anything that's gonna kind of be a constant, because I don't see us expanding parking lots or doing anything like that. And then I guess, so the only other factor really under our control is septics. And then is there any other factor that we can control that contributes to the health of the pond outside of that?
Bank control.
Bank
Yeah,
control.
usage in terms of the surrounding areas have a tendency to get kind of trampled. And so when you start to lose some of the vegetation around the ponds, it makes it all the more easier for all the nutrients to keep sliding down and into the water. So that's one of the concerns out there too. So it's not just in the water, it's the surrounding area as well.
Sure. Is that
What-
has that been a problem? Because I know there's some like small trails around the pond, but it doesn't seem like large areas, at least from just like seeing it, all of a sudden start to open up and more people start to recreate in random areas around the pond. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just curious if that's like a,
I think it varies by pond and by season in terms of how high the water is.
yeah,
Certainly Spectacle Pond has taken a huge beating.
Yeah.
The little public area is devoid of sand practically at this point. It's really raw. Dyer Pond's taken a pretty good hit as well. So it depends on the pond. It depends on the season, the water level, all of that.
There's a couple places on
Okay.
Duck Pond that have a trail, at least one trail that goes down, that's a problem. And all it takes is one bad trail to let the water go down, and then one thing leads to another. And and they have signs warning people to not do that, but it's tough when you have these remote ponds.
And I guess
Could
the
be an
bike
area.
trails
Jake-
are now going to Duck too.
Jake, the other area is possible control is what activities are allowed within a buffer zone of 100 feet from the pond. Fertilization, materials that are used within that buffer area. That's it's another area that we're going to have to
yeah,
get into the plan.
yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. So I know some towns have called for that around the harbor too, for, shellfishing and, to reduce algae growth and stuff.
Yeah, in theory, there's not supposed to be fertilizer or pressure treated wood within 100 feet of the ponds, but whether it's adhered to in practice is one of the things we're looking into.
Yeah.
So that's the 30,000 feet view without getting into the nitty gritty. We do have a lot of open items, including the Hillary had sent us a draft version of the septic and cesspool plans. They're doing a census on it. We're waiting to see the final one. We're looking into the innovative alternative septic systems that are out there. We want to follow up with some folks in Barnstable about those IA systems. There was a phosphate study done up there too, that we're going to track down that person. In terms of the testing, we've got a fair amount to still do in terms of circling back to the park. And we want to talk to some pond coalitions out there in other towns between Orleans and Eastham and Brewster. Those are some of the closer ones. And Eastham evidently does test a handful of their ponds. Orleans apparently has a pretty active pond coalition. So that's on our list. We have a Gupaka meeting in the middle of August. And Herb and I are going to be talking about this work that we're doing and try and get more interested stakeholders, as well as just input from the people who are living around Gull and Long Pond who attend this meeting, to see if there are other things that we're not thinking about that they're thinking about. We're also going to talk to them about converting Gupaka into a Wellfleet Pond Coalition to see if we can get more interest and more members to be involved with the plan. We've also been talking about invasive plant control. We've talked to the park about it, and Phragmites are an issue in a couple ponds. There was another invasive called purple loosestrife that was in one pond and has hopefully been eradicated. So that's constantly on the watch list. What else am I missing, Herb?
Well, just to zoom back and come back for a moment on plant control, that was a question we had. I mean, obviously, we're going to focus on water quality, but if Phragmites took over, was allowed to completely take over, that could change the nature of some of the ponds completely. It is an extremely aggressive invasive plant. And the natural, the seashore's attitude always, their philosophy towards plants are that if it's a native plant, the seashore does not take any action against a native plant. Whatever happens in growth in a native plant should be in a park allowed to happen. However, they will take an aggressive action against invasive plants. And they have been working on eradicating Phragmites, but it unfortunately involves the use of two chemicals, one of which is Roundup, which has caused great debate in its use. That seems to be the only way to control Phragmites. We have to look, this is an open, we're talking now about open items. So this is an open item we still have to get more of an understanding on. There is also a lack of clarity over areas of responsibility for different aspects of monitoring and controlling the ponds. We're obviously not going to resolve that as part of a pond management plan, but there are some areas that we need further clarity on. And I think, Laura, we're going to try and work on this ourselves. John at one time had suggested that if we may reach a point where we have to ask the town attorney to clarify something. We're not there yet, but that could come. I think that could be a possibility. Or we may end up just living with the lack of clarity.
And is also why we're trying to get all these stakeholders to buy in and back it, because if everybody's on board, they've all effectively agreed, and the accountability or who's in charge matters a little less in terms of who's got the authority.
Yes. And we're also looking into potential areas of funding, because we're quite committed, Laura and I are, that this plan be objectively based on at least annual testing. It'd be wonderful if we can have that coincide with the testing that the seashore does. However, the testing that the seashore does is subject to their annual budgets. There were 2 years recently when the seashore did no testing because they didn't have the budgets for it. So I don't think we can, as a plan, rely for the next 10 years on riding on what the seashore does, which means that we have to, one of the open items that Laura and I have to do is identify what is going to be the cost of at least annual, if not twice a year, testing of all these variables. What labs do it? How much does it cost? And are there other sources of funding for this?
There's a couple of things that I suggest you keep in mind. Herb, you just touched on the one, which is the funding. And I would suggest Hillary and Joanne Muramoto as people who might be able to suggest where you could get contracts in the 10, 20, 30,000. I mean, I think we're probably talking at that sort of level.
Yeah.
Check
first of all who they're using.
Yeah. The other thing is, I think you ought to be thinking about when it would be a good time to report to the select board even if we don't have a finalized plan, I think it'd be useful if they knew what was in the works. And I think it'd be good to have that meeting if at the same time, perhaps that with Hillary's help, because the project on managing wastewater, I mean, as she's working on it, and that's going to be a critical part of any remediation process. So it helps, of course, that one member of the select board lives on Long Pond, so you've got a natural additional person of interest who can maybe you talk to John and he might have some suggestions on how to approach the board.
Okay. You're talking about John Wolf, who has
Yeah, John Wolf, right.
that's actually Gold Pond. He's my neighbor.
Yes, I know.
He was over, we had a informal discussion about this already over my kitchen table, but yes, probably good. Laura, what we didn't mention is our time, the goal we're looking for this is to write this plan by the end of the year. To get, if there is an ongoing expense, to get it on next year's warrant. Which would mean we'd have this, hopefully the warrants, should we expect in normal terms to need to get an item on the warrant for next year's meeting, ATM?
February.
John, is that February? Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. We still have lots to do.
Yeah, we do. We have lots to do.
Assuming we get back to the same schedule as we normally get back, a town meeting would be late April, so 2 months ahead of time is enough time for the select board to look at a proposal for an article.
Two other items. Sources of funding is Cape Cod Commission. We have to loop back to them.
Mhm.
They
Sounds
have
good.
sources. They have sources of funding, and the other is that Cape Cod Commission is working on forming a Cape-wide ponds coalition network. And Laura and I are going to a meeting next Tuesday, the 4th, whenever the 4th is.
That was the second.
Whatever it is.
I think
It
it's
could be the
Tuesday, the second. Yeah.
Yeah, Tuesday the 2nd. I'm talking to you at, what time is it now? 7:45 in the morning. in
We
California.
understand. West Coast
I gotta get
brain.
my head back in this. Yeah, but we're going to this, they're having the first in-person meeting. We were at one Zoom meeting. This is the first in-person meeting of representatives from Cape Pond Coalition. It really should be interesting.
See, another reason to meet with the select board is to talk to them about this coalition and ask the select board to support us as the town representative. That gives us some clout.
Okay. We've been saying that already, by the way,
Good,
but that's okay.
good.
And we plan to go back to some of the others as we get further along too. I mean, we told Hillary and crew that we'd be back to them and
Sure.
Suzanne, and we're just still trying to get it all put together on paper and get our heads fully around it.
I think we should emphasize how cooperative everybody has been that we work with. They really have embraced this concept of a database management plan. Okay.
Going back to this business about learning about some of the early research on the ponds, I know that John Portnoy had done some. And when we were doing the first attempt at a ponds plan, which is 10 years ago, John introduced me to a woman who was living in Wellfleet, retired, but had done some really early work.
Hmm.
And that would all have been published work through the seashore. So I'll try to find out where we can get hold of that information.
John, I can ask him. I'll
We
ask
can-
John for
We
it.
can ask Lauren McKean for it too, if,
I'll ask John.
Go to John.
And
That might be a good starting point.
Okay.
I had raised earlier a question, how useful it'd be to understand how the ponds behaved 50 years ago. And John might be a link to get at some of that information.
All right.
I just also remember way more pines than hardwood trees. And now it's a much broader mix, so that would have driven acidity in addition to all the acid rain and,
Yeah, good point.
yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
Is that sufficient weeds detail for you guys? We could go on and on for a long time if you want, so.
We could.
I think you're doing great work. I think my only suggestion is try to get it focused so you arrive at something, so you arrive in port somewhere. And I think you're hoping to have some sort of a plan by the end of the year is exactly along those lines.
We will.
It's not an easy problem, but I think we're off to good start. So that's terrific. Any other thoughts?
I just want to say that on the cyanobacteria collecting, this is just as long as we're talking about ponds and ties into this a little bit. We're getting warning signals in the collection. When I say we, it's APCC. We've had 2 other ponds in Wellfleet show up in areas as ponds of concern this year, which have never shown up before. And a gull pond has not been closed yet this year, but it's shown up as an area of concern by the level of cyanobacteria twice, but also duck and great ponds have shown up this year. And that's scary. It's a foretaste of what we're looking at for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
That's all.
It's important that people in the town know that getting the message out could be very important.
Yeah. Okay.
Tom, you've been quiet but not forgotten. When is the next open space committee? I'd like to, if I can, either you or I talk about this idea of what is the future plan for managing the properties which are under open space control.
Well, we did have some discussion of it at the last meeting, and our next meeting won't be until September sometime, but I think, you know, the idea was discussed that certainly we need to do more than simply protect open space or conservation land from development. And so, you know, the idea of trying to get together with, you know, the Conservation Trust, CONSCOM, and others who have interest in it to try to figure out the best way to do things. The Audubon and the Seashore both have some management plans. I know Audubon has attempted to create some bird habitats in the back areas of the park there in Wellfleet. And I did send an email to Melissa Lowe, who's the director there now, to see who decides what happens over there and try to get an idea of, you know, what sort of things we can do. There are organizations, national and statewide, that have similar interests that we might be able to tap into a little bit for resources and so on. So it's, kind of the way it's been in the past is area of town property, say, may be protected by Conscom. And a lot of it's marshland and, areas that are protected for, so the development doesn't occur there, but maybe there's more that needs to be done. And I guess that was the thought of this whole thing. So we'll just have to see what
Brother.
happens. The next. Yes,
ahead.
John.
Yeah.
No,
Go ahead.
you're breaking up here.
Oh.
No, I didn't have anything. That was it.
Okay. Just for the committee's background, there are two examples of the sort of thinking I had in mind. In Eastham, the seashore has a Fort Hill, which is broad meadows. Left to itself without periodic cutting, Fort Hill would turn back into a forest and would look like all the rest of the seashore land. But by keeping Fort Hill cut, you get a very different variety of species, particularly birds. And then I had mentioned before, there's Mass Audubon sanctuary out in the Berkshires called Canoe Meadow, which used to have vast amounts of pine forest. They cut down some of the pine forest, and you immediately get open space birds like meadowlarks and bobolinks and savanna sparrows. So you get much more diversity. And I'm just nervous if all of the inland conservation area in the town of Wellfleet turns out to be just one forest. That's usually diversity implies strength. So that's the broad argument that broad point of my discussion.
Right. Well, and a lot, if you walk through some of those areas, they're becoming really overgrown with a lot of invasive species too.
Good.
So,
Dan.
you know,
Can I call you back a little bit though? I'm in a meeting. Okay.
So we've all got to run and things to do. There's a few things to couple other votes and one small discussion about the NRA organization. We had some minutes of a meeting on April 29th, which I would like a vote to either make corrections or approve. Is there anyone seeing any corrections? If not, I'd like a motion, please.
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Second,
Any discussion?
it looks good.
Aye.
That's good.
Okay. Second item was, we talked about one item for the town meeting. We have a proposed revised charter. The original charter is over 30 years old. And particularly it implied that somehow the Shellfish Department or Shellfish Advisory Board reported to us. And it had said nothing about ponds. So the proposed revised charter says we're going to do a ponds plan, which we just discussed. And it just says that we cooperate with the town and town committees on follow-up. And it doesn't imply that it implies that we're partners with the Shellfish Advisory Board, not supervisors. So this is exactly the same charter that was approved for town meeting in the spring and got dropped because the board wanted the town meeting to focus only on the critical economic issues. So I just need a vote to ask that this revised charter be on the town meeting in September. I had a comment from the new chairman of the town organization that this is already being worked on. So this is pretty much a pro forma vote, but is there any discussion?
None.
Sorry, John, I do have to run right now, but
Okay,
thanks
Jake.
everybody, and I will see you at the next meeting.
Okay, thanks for your comments. It's very helpful. Good. May I have a vote, a motion and a vote? On
Move.
putting the revised charter onto the town warrant again for September.
Correct.
Second.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good. So, last thing is talking a little bit about the NRAV future organization. We are moving to Maine. And I think that under those circumstances, I can still participate in the work of this committee and intend to do so. But I think it no longer makes sense that I should be chairman. So what I would like to suggest is basically what we already have is that John and Herb be co-chair. That will keep the committee up and running. It turns out that, and for just to reassure John that I'll still be very much involved in this harbor study and getting it done. But it gives a focus for the harbor and a focus for the ponds.
I appreciate the vote. I think I should defer to Laura with much more seniority than I do on this. Laura and I have not talked about this at all, but if you're going to have co-chairs that way.
I mean, I'm still working full-time is the challenge, so.
Yeah.
Can we noodle it a little bit, John?
Yeah, let's noodle this a little bit, because
Okay.
Laura does have so much more experience than I do on this.
And I'd also,
Same thing.
You've got the Dupaka thing though, but
I'd like you to
Yeah.
think about it.
Okay,
I can certainly stay on board for another month. That's no problem.
okay.
and just to add my 2 cents, I mean, when it comes to the nuts and bolts of running the advisory board, I'm gonna defer I'm gonna, I would probably want a lot of help with that particularly. So co-chair is fine, but I don't really, I don't see myself as taking a huge role in the nuts and bolts of actually putting together an advisory board. I don't know if I said that properly, but I don't know how much of that responsibility, I want to shoulder.
Okay, fair enough. We'll take that into
I
account.
still need you, John.
Thanks, John.
Only planning to move, not to disappear. But I will have to gradually work my way out of things. As you heard, Jake is going to be a big help to us. He's awfully busy. He's got a business, a shell fishing business. He's got a young family. But he's had experience in working with a committee. So maybe I can eventually get around to twisting his arm a bit more. This is an easier committee to run, by the way, than the Shellfish Advisory Board. Because the Shellfish Advisory Board needs to do a lot of work in conjunction with the Select Board, which we do not need to do. So I'll just put it on the table that we're going to have to make some changes, and if it doesn't happen until the next meeting or the meeting after that, we can live with that. But 3 years from now is out of the question. Anything else that people would like to discuss? I thought a very useful meeting. John, you and I will need to put our heads together pretty quickly. I'll do some drafting maybe by tomorrow morning, and we can look based on Jake's comments.
As well as Rebecca, to find out time. We need to decide on dates,
Yeah, right. We have to.
timeline.
Right. Good point. You all have a good weekend, and we will be.
Thank you.
in touch.
You too, Jim.
Good
Okay.
meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Really appreciate the work that's
Yep.
going on. Bye now.
Okay, bye-bye.